this session. There we go. This will mean that we can share the webinar to people that haven't been able to make it. Realise that we're coming off the back end of a bank holiday, so who knows what's landed in email boxes over the weekend. Hopefully nothing. Mine was fairly quiet, so we will see. Right, good. So if we begin, my name's Pete, Commercial Director for Platform Wellbeing. For those that haven't met me, although I see some familiar names in our participants today. Today we'll be talking about a familiar theme for Platform Wellbeing, where we've been thinking about compassion and kindness in leadership, and how that can contribute towards a successful organisations in whatever way that looks like. So the next 20-25 minutes, I'm just going to be talking through that. A few introductions before we get going properly. So that's me. I'm Pete. So I've been working across sporting, education, charity settings for well over 30 years, in a number of roles: business development, commercial roles, operational positions, marketing positions. And the last 10 years in particular have drawn me towards an interest in social and values-based enterprise in particular, which is what's landed me at Platform Wellbeing. I have my own experience of navigating the mental health system, and at the same time trying to develop a career, which felt important to me at the time, and trying to find that balance between health and work, which is always a bit of a challenge. And then I've been involved in, particularly over the last 10 years, involved in suicide prevention and post-vention advocacy, and I'm a member of the National Suicide Prevention Alliance, working in a number of projects with them over the last few years. And that links in nicely, actually, to I'm really delighted to introduce Angela Samata, who I've worked with a number of times over the last 10 years, and I've invited to reflect on the presentation I'm about to give at the end of it, and to have a conversation about what compassion and kindness in organisations looks like, and to bring some of that real experience over a wide variety of experiences. So I'm going to ask Angela now to introduce herself, and she has a huge portfolio of experience.
Hello, thanks Pete. Thank you so much for inviting me along today. It's always a pleasure to share a stage with you, whether that's virtually or kind of in person. Always nicer in person, of course, but I'm speaking to you from Liverpool today, so not over in beautiful Wales today. So my name is Angela Samata, and you can see there on screen there's quite an extensive kind of biog there, but I think today it would be great to kind of dip into both sides of my kind of career, because I've worked in suicide prevention, mental health, suicide postvention for just over 20 years now, but also I have a dual career in the art world as well. So I think what's happened for me is I've taken things that I've learned and seen, definitely around compassionate leadership in the arts, into the mental health world and suicide prevention world, and vice versa. So I, at one point, kind of ran one of the UK's largest and biggest art prizes, the John Moores Painting Prize, but at the same time, I'd just been asked by the BBC to make a film called Life After Suicide, which I presented. So the two worlds kind of very much came together at that point. And what it meant was that really for the last 10 years, I've been freelance, which gives me the freedom to work and do things like I co-authored the Zero Suicide Alliance training, the 20-minute training that some of you may have done or seen, how to ask someone if they're feeling suicidal and what to do if the answer is yes. So I co-authored that with my colleague Jane Boland, but then I've also managed to also carry on working in the art world, which is where some of the projects that Pete and I have worked on together have kind of come to fruition. So yeah, lots of experience that I'm very, very happy to dip into there, and yeah, really, really looking forward to spending some time with you all today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Angela. And there is so much more. I think Angela's a trustee of about 8 million different groups. Whenever I look at the latest post on LinkedIn, it's like another one. Fabulous. Good. So we will come back to Angela. Once I've finished talking at you for a bit, forgive me for just rattling through this. This presentation's kind of morphed and evolved over the last 6 or 7 months, as we've begun to think about the work we're doing at Platform Wellbeing and where it sits. For those that don't know Platform, and forgive me for those that know us well, you'll have seen this before. Platform exists. We've existed 35 years this year. Used to be called GoVal and then had a bit of a rebrand just before COVID. So Platform exists to achieve a couple of things. One is to change the dominant narrative around our mental health. And I'll be talking about why mental health and leadership are so intrinsically linked as we go through. So we advocate for a lens on our mental health that's informed by our life experiences and socioeconomic circumstances, rather than thinking about mental health as a something going on in our brain, a chemical imbalance. More about our social circumstances and the things that are happening to us and the things that aren't happening to us have a greater determination on our resulting mental health. And we aim to make that conversation accessible to people. So but the very opportunity to do this kind of webinar to you guys allows us to think about that stuff. And it's a very nuanced conversation. What we aren't saying is that if you go to the GP and they recommend that there's some medication might be needed, that might be an appropriate thing to do at the time. But there is a conversation about our circumstance being the biggest driver of our mental health than anything. And we also aim to make our helping systems work better for people. So we run a extensive talking therapy counselling service, as well as running these preventative training courses and discussions and workshops to build the conversation. So we aim to do some preventive work as well as supporting people in distress on a one-to-one basis. That gives you an idea of the kind of scale. Over 300 staff, so working with over 15,000 people a year across 150 projects. There's probably more than that. These were numbers I picked up from last year, so it's more than that. Working with health boards, local authorities, and increasingly through Platform Wellbeing, working through organisations as well, both commercial organisations and public health organisations. We run a number of projects. As I say, 150 projects. They can be anything from a crisis prevention homes. We've got two in South Wales where people experiencing suicidal ideation can come and be resident in a non-medicalised setting. We run homelessness prevention services. We sit in housing associations working alongside people. So rather than doing two, we work with people and try and empower their agency over their lives and to support them whilst keeping people safe. We run a number of employment projects, an ever-growing children and young people's team. So we run counselling in every school in Swansea Bay area. We've got two what we call hangouts in Cardiff, one in Barry, which are non-referral spaces for young people to drop into when they're experiencing distress and feel like they need support. And then what the Platform Wellbeing side of things aims to take all of our learning of working communities to take to organisations, promote a different conversation. And I was in Friday in Birmingham talking to some techie guys. And what was really interesting is that the conversation really landed well and they were interested in it. So you can feel a kind of a movement happening. And that's our aim is to take that further and faster. So that's a bit of an introduction. Don't know if you can see that. Everything's fine. That's our normal response to the question, how are you? And this is a very typical of me. And I'll be talking about myself a little bit. Is that everything's fine whilst the world around us burns, and actually that's not always. I think we can all relate to that. That's not always true. and we sit in our workplace. When we think about leadership in our workplace, we sit with a number of different things bombarding us. So I've just written a few down there. You can probably think of lots more, and feel free to pop them in the chat if you can. But the pressure to meet targets. So even though I work for a charity, my charity is the social enterprise part of platform, and I feel the pressure to hit financial targets that have been set. We've set budgets at the start of the year, and that very much sits kind of, and if anything keeps me up at night, it'll be around a spreadsheet, to be honest. And it's always been that way. Um, we've got this relatively new pressure to remain sustainable. So the world burns around us, and we're trying to be successful as well in whatever success means. We've got loads of legislative changes, governments changing every 2 minutes, and everything moves, and funding changes, the changing nature of global business, and the growing complexity of doing that business. So the decisions around Brexit just brings a whole load of difficulty into our worlds. Um, and we can't underplay, I don't think, the ability to recover from austerity. Will we ever get out of austerity? The effect of COVID on us. And things I would add to the list there now is the effect of social media, and the effect of media and culture wars, and when we're thinking about leadership and true leadership and compassionate leadership, the examples and role models of the biggest leaders in the world doesn't really tally with that compassion. So all of those inputs can make us just add pressure onto the way that we work in an organization. Beginning to lose my voice, which is really helpful at the beginning of a webinar. Excuse me. So this picture is really useful. So we talk about what's the dominant approach to our mental health, and I think this picture really represents quite nicely a lot of people's experiences. So sitting in a landscape where everything's been chopped down, and I'm seeing a sort of a landscape that's burnt, and the natural habitat of the koala bear, I think it's a koala bear, is um, has been destroyed. Uh, then we have somebody with a clipboard and a notepad and wearing suits to say that this koala has a mental health problem. And I think, given all of the stuff that's going on around us, is it any surprise that a lot of us are feeling anxiety, and sometimes that falling into mental health issues when the world is a really difficult place. This is really useful for me when I'm thinking about my own relationship to my mental health. So I've been through my own experiences over a long period of time, which has eventually brought me to working with platform, actually. Um, but this is an adaptation of a model. So this kind of use this as a way of thinking of how we move in and out of kind of experience in mental health, and when that becomes difficulty. It has been adapted by Dr. Jen Daffin, who's our lead psychologist within platform. So we sit within a safe zone, and particularly when I'm thinking about work, when it's going well, I sit within a comfortable zone where I'm feeling connected to myself, but also to others. So the conversations flow and are easy, and the world around me feels comfortable, and it feels safe, both emotionally in my body, um, but also I feel present, and at that stage in my work life, I'm productive, and I can get things out, and I can handle quite a lot of work, and it can be a really productive time, and I can make decisions quite quickly. But then that's not life. Life is difficult, and so that utopia of being in that zone isn't going to be there all the time, because the world throws curveballs at us. So when threat begins to grow, we find ourselves, and you'll probably be familiar with the flight and fight scenario, which is born from sort of running away from tigers thousands of years ago, keep ourselves safe, you begin to feel the need to defend yourself and attack or run away from stuff, and anxiety grows and you feel unsafe. Um, and that dipping in and out of that sometimes creates a response where actually that can build on productivity. If I feel the urge and I've got a deadline looming, I might feel anxious about it, but actually I can regulate that, go back into the zone of feeling safe. Um, and there's a use to that's a natural response. But when it becomes difficult and when it becomes um, perhaps an issue for some people, if we aren't able to regulate our emotions, we become hyper vigilant. The whole people pleasing thing happens, and I see myself as a people pleaser where I desperately want to hit every deadline. I desperately want to please people in um, um, in in everything that I do, when sometimes that is not possible. And so the threats grow, the noise around those threats and in the brain grows, and you begin to move into that freeze zone. And this I found myself in a number of times over my life where it's complete overwhelm and you can't cope, you can't get away from it. There's a feeling of hopelessness. I get a feeling of impending doom, is that I recognize if I'm feeling that, then I need to be working on my self-regulation. Um, um, Depression can kick in, you feel unsafe. And when I was talking to the guys in the tech companies last week, I think there was some light bulb moments happening, certainly from the feedback I got of going, hang on a minute, I'm moving into those zones and I'm recognizing that stuff quite readily. And and I think to understand the relationship between ourselves and our mental health in this way is a really useful way to consider, how do I move myself back down into the flow and fusion, the safety zone? What do I need to do to keep myself regulated and bring myself back into that mode? That's really useful. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, so we'll hold on to that. Sometimes when I'm talking at events, feels a little bit woo-woo, this stuff, and it feels like, oh yeah, we've got to be compassionate to ourselves, guys, and it turns into a kind of a um, almost a social media um, satire kind of thing. But it's really important, particularly when I talk to people who aren't working in mental health and aren't working in that space, to realise that all of this stuff is backed up, is evidence-based through some fairly significant organisations. So the one thing I picked up on was the World Health Organization, and they talk about our work and our mental health is intrinsically linked. So good. This to me seems obvious, but it's worth talking through. Good work. There's a cycle there of good worker health means that, as we've spoken about in that kind of previous slide, means that I can be productive. I can feel the flow, and I can contribute something. By doing that, it makes my organization more competitive in whatever way that needs to be, whether it's a financial aspect or whether it's in terms of outcomes or whether it's in terms of the social value side of things. By being competitive, it means that we're creating those outcomes. And that should automatically lead to economic development and prosperity. And again, I use that. This is kind of very financial language, but we'll use it loosely. Prosperity, an ever-growing organization, creates well-being within an organization. Social well-being should, and I say should, mean that we all can get paid a little bit more, although that's not always the case. Um, and through that feeling of well-being, it creates good worker health. So there's an intrinsic link behind keeping an organizational healthy and focusing on its well-being, um, and keeping that organization going. This isn't just about being nice to each other and being the right thing to do, although it is the right thing to do. This is about maintaining healthy organizations and that is from a well-being point of view, but also intrinsically linked to that the success of the organisation from an operational point of view. So what can be done differently? So I write this down as this is my experience 20 years ago, around about 20 years ago. Experiencing some distress, reaction to stuff that happened in my childhood, kind of crept into my God, it was longer than 20 years ago, it was 30 years ago. Experience of childhood stuff crept into my life, created some distress, really needed some support. And so I'm referred to the HR department, who then refer me to the GP, get signed off sick for 6 weeks, sit in isolation, don't hear from the organisation at all. The thing moves a little bit. There wasn't much support in those days, and I think it's worse now to get access-free support. It's really difficult. And eventually things shift a little bit. I feel like I should go back to work because that's what everybody's telling me to do, and then the cycle repeats. And I don't think that's 30 years ago. I'm not sure a huge amount has changed for many organizations, to be honest. Or we can create conditions for psychological safety through compassionate leadership. So what does that mean? So what does it mean to you? I think it's really useful. This is part of so this presentation is taking lots of different inputs from this has come from a 6-day training course that we do on compassionate leadership, and is kind of a rating scale. So you'll see on the high side of psychological safety, you feel safe to be vulnerable, you feel safe to be authentic, you feel safe to collaborate, you feel safe to challenge. And on the low side, and do have a think, and I'm sure there'll be some nods of agreement if you have ever experienced any of this kind of stuff, because it's really common. Feelings of micromanagement, double standards, when blame and gossip are sort of the culture of the organisation, there's not much trust. There's fear driven. So if you're not hitting your targets or you haven't done the work, you're fearful that something's going to go wrong, and there's really no accountability. And as you go through that scale, you can build on the different experiences that you may have experienced in your own work life. And I think that's a really useful thing. And I feel when I joined Platform 2 years ago. I really feel, and it's not all the time, but I really feel that high part of the scale, in that I do feel I can bring myself. So by very nature of me talking to you and sharing my own experiences, I do feel safe in that vulnerability to talk about stuff, and feel, we have many conversations about being authentic within the work that we do. And it is a huge collaboration, but I've also experienced the micromanagement, and that's what's driven me away from work in the past and driven me away from organizations, is when I feel I've just been sat on and I haven't been trusted to get on with the work. Okay, I'm going to just lighten the mood for 2 minutes. This is a guy called Paul Langley, I think his name is, who's given me permission to show this. You may have seen him on your socials if you're attached to socials. He does some skits. This is only about a minute long. He does some skits which are really amusing. Some of them about family life, but some of them, and the really kind of really pointed ones, are about the workplace. So while we're about halfway through my little bit, well, more than that, I'm just going to play you this and see if you recognize any of this going on in your own life.
Okay, so I'm about to blindside you all with an unexpected brainstorming session for something very important I'm going to give none of you any extra context for, but I will expect immediate results. The purpose of this will be for me to take your ideas and pass them off as my own without any of you actually realising. I'm now going to flex my authority by putting one of you on the spot to do something immediately without any time to think about it. Tim? I'm trying to appear relaxed, but I'm panicking because I have absolutely no idea what I'm about to suggest, because I'm literally just saying the words as they come into my head, and I'm just hoping that somehow under pressure I actually do okay. Okay, I'm clearly disappointed that the idea you literally just thought of wasn't perfect. Maybe you didn't understand the brief I've only just half told you about properly? Anyone else? What about a suggestion that somehow by pure chance actually does meet the brief? I'm doing a muted response to make you question whether that suggestion was any good, when of course I will be using it and passing it off as my own. Who's next? Jen? So, although this session has been sprung upon us, I'd actually already heard about it and have been putting in extra hours in my own time to give you the perfect idea that covers every aspect of the brief and impresses everyone on this call. Pretends to be impressed, but my personal dislike for you means I instantly feel threatened by this and will now make your life hell. Expect a meeting with your line manager.
Fabulous. If he releases a workplace themed content every Friday on Instagram, I think, and he's got his own YouTube channel as well. There is truth in everything he says, and I think you can pick up on your own experiences of when that kind of stuff happens to you. Hang on a minute. Sorry. So that brings me, breaks it up a little bit, but that brings me on nicely to a model that Platform have been working on, which is based on, I'm going to skip that. Well, no, I'm not going to skip that one actually. This is based on work from Circular Security, which is a parenting model. And the parenting model for Circular Security works with groups of people who want to improve their parenting, often in really difficult situations, perhaps naturally don't have those skills and to be able to do the parenting thing intuitively. And the parenting Circular Security talks about sending your children out into the world to be able to explore, to be able to take risks, and to find stuff out about themselves, but also to come back and have a safe place when you need protection, when you need to celebrate, when you need to commiserate, and for there always to be a place where you can come back to, where you can remain safe, but also to grow and explore. And so the work we've been doing has been taking that model and thinking about it in the realm of work. So if we think about ourselves as leaders and we think ourselves as managers of people, our role really is to send people sort of sat within our teams out into the world with a particular tasks in mind to go and deliver that task and to meet that task. And so by sort of overlapping the circle of security model into workplace, we can see that our role is to encourage development, to provide the structure and boundaries within the workplace, but to be curious, to be trusting, to allow to suggest that failure isn't the end of stuff, and that we can deal with failure and it's okay to fail, and that we can bring people back to the safe pair of hands where they can explore, they can develop, and they can be reflective in the work that they do. And actually, it's a really good model that I often sort of think about when we're working with people is what do we need to enable people to be their best and authentic self within work. I think this is really important. So when I talk to leaders, talk to lots of chief executives, it is no good. None of this stuff that we're thinking about is any good unless it's authentic, unless we really mean it. I think mental health has often been popped into a tick box exercise where as long as we do something, we've covered that off and delegated it out to individuals within the organization, then that's good enough. And I think the argument is that might not be good enough. And actually, our whole organizational well-being for the people within our organization is a culture, and it's a whole culture, and it's not about isolating individuals and often signposting them out into services outside of the organization. This is a question that often pops up when we're thinking about kindness and we're thinking about compassion. It doesn't mean we're about being soft. And actually, this is taken from Circular Security training as well. It's not about being soft. It's about being bigger and stronger, and kinder and wiser, and having that balance rather than falling into the trap of being mean. And I've certainly in my management career over years, I've been mean to people, and I probably owe people apologies for that meanness. Born from a threat of things going wrong, so you then think, right, I've got to take control. Um, but also on the other side, feeling weak and letting things happen and putting your head in the sand. And actually, that balance and the way that we build that balance between being bigger and stronger, wiser and kind, is the real skill to being an effective leader. And it's part of the reason why we've developed some of the leadership training that we have. I'm nearly done, I promise. So, as with a lot of this stuff, compassionate leadership begins with you. Unless you are looking after yourself, unless you are able to recognize when you're tipping into that unhealthy habits where work is making you and driving you into not being in a safe place, then how can you possibly role model that to people, other people within your teams? And I'm not going to play that one because that would take too long. We've done lots of work over the last couple of years with various organisations right across the country. And I think the biggest challenge in all of this is not necessarily persuading people to put some money towards some development work, although that can be challenging. The biggest challenge is finding the time to do this and prioritising the time to be able to really sit down as an organisation and think about this stuff. And I think ultimately that is a signal that our well-being and that compassionate side isn't always prioritized. And so I think part of the work that we're doing as platform and platform well-being is to just raise the volume on the importance of that compassion and the results that it can bring as well. And the fact that you can improve the culture and that will result in better outcomes for the organization. I'm going to stop talking there because we've got about 25 minutes left, and I think we're just about on time. As I say, that is part of a bigger suite of training packages. If you are interested, I'll be talking at the very end about what offers we can give. But I guess I'm going to stop sharing, and at this stage, I'd really just like to invite Angela in as kind of our guest today, to reflect on the kind of stuff she's heard from that, and then whether any of your own experiences kind of echo some of the stuff that we've spoken about there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Pete. That presentation was just fantastic. I think you touched on some really important points there, and it definitely, like as you were talking, I could feel stuff was coming up for me, and kind of moments of that I've experienced compassionate leadership kind of definitely came up for me. There's just a few things that I wanted to bring in. Somebody in the chat mentioned about eco-anxiety, and I think you hit on such an amazing point, because I think sometimes for me, compassionate leadership is about recognizing some of the anxiety that we have within the people that we work with, but also at an organizational level, kind of holding that and kind of putting things in place to address that. So if you know that, lots of us experience eco-anxiety and concern about the climate. So again, I think we mustn't forget about the leadership bit of compassionate leadership. If you can lead and you can put some things in place within your organization that is going to alleviate some of that eco-anxiety, you know that your organization is trying to kind of offset things, or whatever, it kind of feels as if that will kind of that level of leadership, kind of, we need to have compassion in our organizational kind of documentation and kind of our organizational kind of infrastructure, as well as kind of as individuals. I think the other thing that came up for me as well, Pete, when you were talking there, was this idea of curiosity. And if you are authentically leading with compassion, if you are a compassionate leader, and it is that level of congruence and authenticity, I know I'm talking like a therapist here, sorry, but I think the curiosity has to be there as well. Like, we have to actually be curious in an authentic way, not in a kind of snoopy way, where it's kind of, I had someone who used to work with me that used to call supervision snoopervision, because they were really aware, and it felt very intrusive because it was kind of, but I think if we have a gentle curiosity within our compassionate leadership, that can really stand us in good stead for getting to know the people that we're working with, but also getting to know them not in a reductive way, you know, this is your job title, these are your targets, this is what you were hired to do, more in a way that we get to know them as whole people, and then we get to be able to lead compassionately because we are sensitive to what's going on in their lives outside of work. And I think you can only get that with that kind of curiosity in there as well, you know. So there was a few things that came up for me there. And I think for me, you know, one of the examples that I thought of straight away, Pete, when you were talking there around compassionate leadership that I've actually experienced as a more junior person, was when I was working in the arts. I had been invited, because I was already working in suicide prevention as well in a voluntary capacity. So people in the art world knew that I was being paid to run one of the, you know, UK's biggest art prizes. But actually what I really wanted to do was be able to take up what I'd been offered in my personal life, which was to sit on the all-party parliamentary group for suicide prevention in England and Wales. And I really wanted to do it. I had 2 kids who were teenagers at the time, and I was a single parent, and I couldn't figure out how I could do it. And I had a conversation with somebody about, you know, that I really wanted to do this and I've been offered this opportunity, and it kind of got fed back. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered that one of my very senior managers at the galleries had heard about the position that I'd been offered, and she'd actually made it so that I had 4 extra unpaid days in my holiday allowance, which meant that I could actually go to London and sit just, you know, once every 3 months. I could go and sit in Parliament and do my bit and feel as if I was adding value with my lived and living experience, but without fear of compromising my paid role. And for me, that was true compassionate leadership, because actually I never found out who made that decision until years later. But what it meant was that I could feel great about the work I was doing in the art gallery, because I also was feeling really positive about the impact that I was having in that other world, and seemingly unconnected world. But actually, for me as a person, it was an incredibly valuable thing to do. So again, it just really brought that forward for me, Pete, when you were talking about what we need to thrive, not just survive in our workplaces. And it's that kind of decision making and people kind of thinking about what you need as a whole person, because actually they got 110% out of me, you know, because I was happy with what I was doing in the other side of my life.
Thanks, Angela. I think there's something there. I reflect on the core work that Platform does, and Platform sits in communities across, predominantly across Wales, and we 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 sit in communities to work alongside people. So it's important that we're not there to necessarily fix problems that we can't fix. I think that would be disingenuous in our work. But we aim to sit alongside people. But sometimes we also need to step in to keep people safe. And I think there's a nuance between, we often think about trauma-informed work, and the purest form of being trauma-informed is not to step in but actually sometimes that's the right thing to do to keep people safe. And when I translate that onto kind of leadership stuff, question I had last week when I was with the techies is, but what happens if you're in the shit and you just need to get on with the work? and you need to tell people what to do. And I had an example of a startup organisation that were going to go bust if a deal didn't land within 5 days of the stuff. So real. Noreen, I noticed you mentioned the capitalist stuff, real capitalist stuff. This is about organisations bringing in the money, otherwise they wouldn't survive. And I think at the time we were talking, I was talking about, surely that's then about being authentic and honest rather than avoiding that. I think that's where in the scale of stuff where you've got weakness or you've got being mean, and the balance side of things. But that's a situation where being honest and being authentic, that it's going to be difficult, but you're feeling like you're in the difficulty together. And I think very often in organizations, and actually this isn't just an organizational thing, it's a whole cultural thing and could be a social media thing. We've got this cult of individualism going on at the moment where we all need to be showing off that we're successful and beautiful and having fabulous holidays. But actually the power of being together and sharing that risk together, and feeling that the leadership are being honest with you and you've got that trust, I think gets you out the stuff.
It does. But I think for me, when I hear you say that, Pete, I think there's a few things there for me. One is about transparency and a real kind of belief that you as a leader can be transparent and really vulnerable, actually, sometimes when you've got really difficult situations, to be able to bring people together to say, I'm under this much pressure and I don't know what to do with it. Will you work with me? You know what I mean? So I think for me, it's about having a real belief in yourself and being transparent. But the other thing I'm hearing when you say that, and at the moment I'm a consultant with the Royal Foundation, and I'm working with the Impacting Communities team. And the thing that has really stayed with me throughout the work that I'm doing with them is that there is a real transparency there. And also what I'm also seeing is that they are very interested. And when you talk about being alongside people, they at the foundation are very, very interested in people's lived and living experience. So this isn't just about historically trauma-informed, what happened to you. This is about what's happening with you now, what's happened to you, what has somebody done to you that is kind of resulted in the way that you're feeling now or the way that you're leading now. Like what you know, and I think the individualism stuff for me means that yes, we kind of, you know, please don't judge my Instagram, anyone who kind of goes on my Instagram after this, but individualism means that yes, you are sometimes very interested in your own experience and kind of putting that out there. However, there's also something there about having impact as an individual and you know, recognizing our own agency. I think for me, like, I've been called a servant leader and I've never really understood what that meant. You know, I was always the one that kicked off my shoes and kind of polished the glass when it needed polishing because we were just about to welcome, you know, 300 people to the gallery. But apparently I'm a servant leader. And I think for me, that means that hopefully it means that I can kind of lead by example, I suppose, really. And I think when you talked about transparency, but also when you talked about self-care as well, Pete, I think a servant leader, in order to lead compassionately and with compassion and curiosity, you do have to take care of yourself because you can't hold everybody's lived experience and lead as well if you kind of not in touch with what's happening for you as well, you know. So I love the fact that you talked about that self-care piece, because I think it's anything but selfish. It's kind of selfless in a way, really, because you're kind of trying to bring your own authenticity to the situation, you
know. If we've only got about 10 minutes left, which that's gone by really quickly. If anybody's got any questions, do either stick your hand up or pop them in the chat. I'm certainly happy to ask those any of those questions to Angela. Angela, I've got a bit of a question. So you are as I hinted at, you've got so many fingers in so many pies. It blows my mind. I feel anxious looking at your resume, to be honest. Resume, that's very American. Your CV. How do you, on a practical basis, how do you manage that load of people asking you constantly to be involved in stuff that enables you to create that space to have that compassion?
I think I'm getting better at saying no. I think when I first became freelance, I spent the first 6 months saying yes to everything because I was frightened that nobody would ever ask me again. So I kind of said yes to everything, and then ended up being like really, really burnt out. I remember the first year I was freelance, I remember checking my emails on Christmas Day, and I thought, all my family were downstairs, and I thought, oh, okay, so this is starting to get kind of close to burnout here. So, and I was starting to feel sick every time I looked at the diary. And I think sometimes when we work freelance, actually compassionate leadership is really difficult because you're the leader and you've got no compassion for yourself. Your self-compassion is kind of like zero because you're kind of like, worried that people aren't going to ask you again. So I think for me, I really just have to kind of think about where can I add value, where can I make a difference. You still have to earn, and nobody suspend your mortgage while you're working out how to be a good person. So it's kind of, for me, it's about balance, and it's about, for me, I can always feel when I'm doing too much stuff in the suicide prevention world and not enough stuff in the art world. So at the moment, I chair one of the advisory boards at Tate Liverpool while the building is closed, and they're trying to raise a huge amount of money to open a new building. But then I'm also doing the work with yourselves and the Royal Foundation and things. So for me, I need to stay in touch with how I'm feeling about where I'm kind of able to add value so that I kind of have got that internal balance. Because if I'm doing too much of one and not enough of another, I can feel it. But sometimes I realize that I'm actually ignoring that. So I have to be kind of quite authentic in what I'm feeling, But then the two things often come together. So I've just written something called Restoration, which is a mental health and wellbeing guide for museum and gallery staff. So that's the free to download. But for me, it was about taking what I've learned in the mental health and suicide prevention world and the trauma-informed world and bringing that right into the art gallery world, because I realised that sometimes people were coming into the art gallery talking about really, really difficult experiences, but actually nobody was prepping the staff or asking the staff or asking attendants, would you like to be in while people are talking about domestic violence, or people are talking about experiences of, what it's like to be an immigrant to this country or somebody who is seeking asylum. Nobody had thought to check in with the attendees that they wanted to be in the room when that discussion was being had. So I suppose I just try to bring the best of compassionate leadership that I see and feel in both worlds and try and bring them together to kind of cross-pollinate and benefit each other, really.
It's really interesting that because I wouldn't have thought in the art world, I wouldn't have thought that would happen, but actually when you talk about it, and we are seeing, just flipping it into kind of the world that platform sits in, which is in a lot of housing sort of settings. We've seen a real huge uptick in housing associations and related organisations approaching us to access supervision for their teams who are working on the coalface. So there's people who are working with people, and I think it's really encouraging to see that increase in requests for supervision, because people are realizing that people are even hearing people's stories, and very often the people hearing people's stories are sat in communities as well. So they're not sat away in a nice country estate. They're within those communities and they're hearing the difficult stories within it. And so for organizations to get that they need to look after their staff is a real encouraging kind of movement that we're beginning to notice.
And I think as compassionate leaders in whatever sector you're in, I can fully see why people are coming to platform for supervision, because as compassionate leaders, we're often bearing witness to other people's trauma, or other people's circumstances, or other people's difficulties. You know, very rarely does somebody knock on your office door. I mean, I used to have it when, you know, all the time. Very rarely do people come and knock on your office door to say something fantastic's just happened in my personal life and I really want to share it with you. You know, often it's when it's kind of, you know, it's really hit the fan, and somebody kind of needs to come and see you in an emergency because something terrible's happened. So I think that that idea of compassionate leadership and having supervision, I think is an essential part of self-care, you know, within that leadership role, you know. So again, for me, it's essential, and I can fully see why people would be coming to an organization like Platform who've got that experience, that authentic curiosity about how can we work with your organization, how can we support you as leaders, because I think it's contagious. This is not just contagious kind of from senior leaders down. This is contagious when you see good, compassionate leadership kind of on a kind of on a managerial level. I think that can really permeate up. You know, people in senior management can see what's happening at that level, and it can permeate up as well. I've seen that happen several times.
Fab. Thank you, Angela. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got to go through some final sort of closing stuff. I'll just refer to some of the thoughts that were dropped in to the chat there. That I'm now struggling with the technology. I saw something from honesty and vulnerability within a team organization coming from people in position of leadership are so powerful. I've had experience of both positively and negatively. I think we all have. And I think it can permeate up, but often senior leaders leave it to the middle management to own that compassionate leadership, and that's the issue. And I can completely agree with that. And I think it's a cultural thing, and I think it's got to be a whole. It's got to be live and breathe across the whole organisation. It's no good being delegated out to middle management or wherever. And I think that's part of the problem with something like mental health first aid, and it's delegated out to individuals without people. It just remains a signposting mechanism again, and leaves people in a vulnerable situation rather than it being held by the whole organisation.
Can I mention just very quickly one of my bugbears when it comes to compassionate leadership? Please, like, shout it from the rooftops. It's not okay to just leave our mental health first aiders to work with everybody's mental health and mental health challenges. Like, we have to, when we put our mental health first aiders through their training, we have to have something in place that we will, you know, we're putting them forward as leadership kind of, you know, people within the mental health kind of conversation. We have to give them supervision. We have to look after them. They can't just be the kind of go-to people without us as leaders kind of really looking after them and really cherishing them within the organization. They are not a dumping ground for other people, you know, for us as leaders to say, oh, go and see that person, they're the mental health first aider. We have to look after them. We have to cherish them and see those people as extraordinary in the role that they do. So I would love to see within compassionate leadership our mental health first aiders really kind of elevated and supported and given adequate supervision and additional support to recognise what they're doing within our organisations.
Cool, great. We got 2 minutes left, and I like to keep on time. Thank you, Angela. I always value our time together. And if any of you ever come out for lunch with myself and Angela, we often get free food. It's just a thing that's happened in our lives, isn't it?
Yeah, because people can hear what we're talking about on the next table, and then we go to pay our bill and people like love what we've been talking about, or they really identify with it. And sometimes, I mean, no pressure on anyone who happens to be sitting at the next table, but sometimes we go to pay our bill and the bill's been paid by somebody who's had lived experience of whatever it is that Pete and I have been talking about. So no pressure if you're ever sitting next to us, but you know, that's the standard.
Fab. Thank you, Angela. Appreciate your time. I'm just going to share two more slides very briefly. I kind of relate to everything we've spoken. So this will be sent out. So I'm not going to talk in any great depth on this. This will be sent out to everybody that's joined in today. Platform Wellbeing sits and exists to support others and to support ourselves through preventative training, through a number of services, either supervision or talking therapies, and we're introducing some executive coaching sides to really build time. So when I spoke about time, our aim is to build time to think about this stuff. That's why Platform Wellbeing exists, really, is to create space and time to think about this stuff and build strategies that can that really help in our work. This is a series of webinars. So our next webinar is 11th of July with Dr. Kieran Sidhu, who's a clinical psychologist working within the NHS settings. But we're also lucky to have her on a 1 day a week basis working with us. And then alongside the wellbeing webinars, we also run a strength-based learning program. So particularly relevant for people working with people. So people in housing, homelessness settings, care settings. And we've got a learning program that happens every couple of months, and the next one's in June. And these are all free. So these are the aim of these is to give you a taste of the kind of training that we put together, and then hopefully as opportunities arise, we can engage in kind of paid for services as well. And all of these recordings, as I've seen multiple requests to get a copy of this, all of these are placed on our YouTube channel, so they will be there for people to see, and do feel free to share them. I think. Oh, there's some faces. So these are the people that you'll encounter should you want to talk to us. There's me. Mary's our business development manager. So she spins the plates very adeptly. Dr. Shan Mulcahy is our head of training delivery, and then Dr. Kath Potter is our head of talking therapies. So those are the people that you might encounter should you want to engage with us more. Really appreciate everybody sticking around. We only lost about 3 of you, which is good. I take that as a sign that we're talking something. So that's great. Really appreciate you being with us. If you've got any questions, you'll get a feedback form at the end of the session as well as part of the reminder email. Please let us know if you want to talk to us more, reach out. And thank you for listening. We will say goodbye.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much.
Thanks.